Welcome back to our Wedding Planning 101 series. I'm Nichelle, and today we're going to be talking about budget. So I think there's really two aspects to planning your budget for your wedding day. The first aspect is just figuring out how much money you have to spend. And this can be a little bit more daunting than you might initially anticipate. Typically, this money is coming from a variety of sources. You and your future spouse might be paying for a lot of the wedding, but some of that might be coming out of savings, and some of that might be money that you are earning over the course of the wedding planning process and kind of putting aside for your wedding as you go. Additionally, you might have some family members that are contributing, whether that's your parents, your grandparents, or someone else in your family. So like I said, the first thing you need to do is figure out how much money you personally have to spend overall. So I would recommend going into your savings and both of you and having a conversation about what both of you would feel comfortable pulling from your individual savings, or if you have any joint savings set up. That way you kind of have a starting point. Also, look at what would be reasonable for you to save between now and your wedding day. You might not have a date picked yet, but you probably have a general time frame. You know if you're going to want to get married in the next 6 months or in a year and a half. So kind of look at that based on how much you spend and how much you would be able to put aside. So that's going to be your personal contribution. Family contributions can be a little bit harder to figure out. Money is always something that's a little bit uncomfortable to talk about, so bringing this up can be tricky. Conversations around money can be uncomfortable. Hopefully they will just volunteer the information that they are planning on giving you some money for your wedding, but you may have to ask them about whether they are planning on contributing to your wedding or not. And then another important thing to get from them is how much money are they giving you? Sometimes they will just give you an amount of money. They'll say, we're going to give you $5,000 to spend on your wedding. And sometimes they want to be a little bit more involved and want to cover a particular aspect of the wedding. So it's important to kind of talk with them and figure out what exactly they are envisioning when they're talking about contributing to your wedding day. Another important thing to talk about is, when do they plan on giving you this money? Are they giving it to you up front, or are they planning on reimbursing you for particular costs? This is just something important to keep in mind as your initial deposits and things start to come in. I think it's also important to talk about their expectations for what your wedding is going to look like and how their money is going to be spent at the beginning of this conversation. I think one of the things that can really get tricky down the road is when a family member is contributing a lot financially and they want this particular aspect of a wedding a particular way. At the end of the day, it's your wedding day and you're in charge, but you don't want to come down to a situation where you're going to potentially damage family dynamics or have people threaten to pull their money out of your wedding. So talk about their expectations up front, see if it's something they'd be willing to meet, and if they seem like they're going to be a pain in the butt to work with, consider not accepting their contribution. It might be worth it in the end to save yourself some of the distress of trying to manage their expectations along with what you want for your wedding day. Okay, now that you've kind of figured out how much money you have all together, I would sit down and come up with an estimated budget overall. I love paper and pen. I'm a paper planner girl, and I think you can do a lot of your wedding planning on paper if that's something you're into, but I would definitely advise against doing your budget in a paper planner, because if you do it in a spreadsheet, the spreadsheet will do a lot of the work for you. Your budget is going to evolve throughout the wedding planning process, so having a digital copy that's going to be able to adapt as you need it to and keep things up to date, it's going to keep your total at the right amount, is really important. There's a ton of free spreadsheets online, so find one that seems to fit you and your needs. I've linked the Don't Forget the Champagne's budget tracker down below if that's something that you are interested in. There's a lot of guides that break down the percentages of what you should spend where on your wedding, and I think maybe those can be a good starting point, but really, they don't serve you that much. Your wedding is going to look different than anyone else's wedding, and your spend financially is going to look different than anyone else's. Yes, of course, you don't want to spend 75% of your budget on your photographer. That seems a little unreasonable. It's going to be hard to feed your guests and have a venue on what's left. But maybe you do want to spend a bigger chunk of your budget on photographer and cut back a little bit on catering. And that's totally fine and totally up to you. No one else will know these percentages. It's not like the closer you can get, the better. The first thing I recommend all couples do before kind of delving into spending their money, at least on this paper budget, is to set aside 5 to 10% in an emergency wedding savings fund. Just like you might have an emergency fund for your life, it's important to have one for your wedding day in case anything goes awry on that day. It's a fund that shouldn't be touched until the month of your wedding, and ideally not even until the day of your wedding. Best case scenario, you don't have to touch it at all, and you just go into your marriage with a couple extra dollars, which who's mad about that? I encourage couples that are DIYing a lot of aspects of their wedding to go closer to that 10%, where if you're hiring out a lot of vendors, you can probably err a little bit closer to that 5%. If you have a lot of vendors, a lot of times your vendors will be able to cope with emergencies that may come up as they come up, and you won't have to deal with those costs. But I would literally like to emphasize, it is not for emergencies like my favorite dress is $500 over the budget we had initially set. It's for emergencies like our outdoor June wedding is expected to have snow now, and now we need to rent a bunch of space heaters. Or we forgot to order tablecloths, and now we need to. It's for things that are truly, for whatever reason, didn't get taken care of during the wedding planning process, but need to be taken care of before your guests arrive, or maybe while they're there. So, like I said, I don't recommend those percents to be a hard and fast rule. Instead, I like to start with your priority items. So we haven't gone into depth on this, but you should have established some items that are of utmost importance to you and your future spouse on your wedding day, whether that's food or photographer or your venue or your decor or whatever that may be. I would say start there. This doesn't mean you're going to be able to afford your dream photographer, but it does give you a better shot at it. So if you can try to put aside as much money as you think you would need, then hopefully you'll be able to build the rest of the budget around that. If not, you might have to cut back a little bit, but you'll still be able to keep that at a top priority. Google is your best friend during this process. If you are doing your own budget, I anticipate most of you have never planned a wedding before. So you might not know about a lot of these costs. I would recommend Googling them. Is Google going to give you the perfect picture? Absolutely not, but it'll give you a starting point. That way you know if what you're budgeted is reasonable. Would it be reasonable to expect to get like $10 a plate with a traditional catering company? No, that's pretty far below the standard. You might have to get a little creative if that's what you want to do budget-wise for catering, or you might have to increase your catering budget. So Google can at least give you a starting point. That way you know where to start, where to work from with those budget numbers. Your budget will evolve and change as you continue to plan your wedding. I encourage my couples to not even worry about solidifying their budget. I mean, you want to have a starting point, but don't feel like, oh, I'm going off budget until you've booked your top 3. For most people, this is venue, catering, and photographer, or if you have another top priority, if video is really important to you, or floral, it can be kind of any of your top priority vendors. Once those are booked, they tend to be some of the more expensive items. You can really solidify your budget. It'll probably still change a little bit, but it'll be pretty locked in. Speaking of venues, if you are hosting your wedding at a traditionally non-event space, so whether that's a backyard wedding or you're renting out a restaurant, make sure to take into account rentals into this initial cost. Rentals, particularly if you are doing like a backyard outdoor wedding where you're gonna have to bring in everything, can get exorbitantly high. And if you haven't built in enough of a cushion for that, you're gonna be in trouble later down the road when you start actually booking those rentals. And then make sure to keep up to date on your budget. As new contracts come in, as you purchase things for your wedding, just update it in your budget. Most budgets will have a kind of anticipated and then actual cost. That's another reason why it's nice to have a digital planner, because you can add line items in. If you didn't have a line item for flower girl dresses but have decided that you are going to gift those to your flower girls, you can add that in. But do make sure it's staying up to date. Those sneaky little costs can really add up. You're like, oh my gosh, it's not that much for us to order table numbers. But when you've ordered table numbers and 100 votives and like some hair clips for your bridesmaids, and it just adds up really quickly, and those costs, I think, more than anything else, are what push couples over their budget. They've budgeted out for the big things, but they don't realize the hundreds and sometimes even thousands of dollars that those little things can add up to. So that was my introduction to budgeting. Budgeting is definitely a tricky topic, and there's a lot more that can go into it. It's definitely a more complex topic than this short video can give you a glimpse into, but hopefully this gave you a starting point to help you kind of figure out what you should do. My biggest advice is to take breaks when you need to not get overwhelmed. I think as soon as money is introduced, it can be stressful. Take a couple deep breaths and recognize it's gonna be okay. All right, well, I will talk to you next week with more wedding planning tips on Wednesday, and I'll be seeing you sometimes later this week with a fun little video. So look forward to that too. All right, subscribe if you haven't already, and leave a comment below if you have any other major wedding topics that you would like me to cover. Bye.